Much ado has been made about Twisted Metal by me. It's kind of quickly become one of my favorite franchises. On the surface, it's a wacky series about blowing up other people's cars, but it's deceptively deep right under the surface. With that said, the last game in the series at time of writing was Twisted Metal 2012, a game that the collective gaming landscape forgot about as quickly as a hiccup. Twisted Metal, despite being arguably the PlayStation's first killer app, has been left in dormancy for quite a while. Too long if you ask me. Not that that's unusual for Sony, they're notoriously terrible at maintaining aging intellectual property. But with rumors ever circulating about a possible new game and the TV show coming out, I've been thinking about what I would want to have if they decided to make a new Twisted Metal game. What do I want them to do with a hypothetical new game to make it the absolute best it could possibly be? So I came up with a slightly disjointed wish list. Note, this is just my wish list. I'm sure all of you watching want different things than me, and I'm sure I'm gonna forget some things, as I tend to do, so why don't you leave your wish list in the comment section below. Also, when I say new Twisted Metal game, I'm working under the assumption that it's gonna be a full-fledged AAA game. There's apparently a mobile game in the works, but mobile games don't count. This is a wish list if they ever made a true, blue, new, big budget game. Let's get started. I guess the first and foremost thing to discuss is the gameplay. Obviously, traditional Twisted Metal gameplay is basically a free-for-all demolition derby taken to the absolute extreme, and despite a host of different developers, engines, weapons, and so on and so forth, it's generally maintained this identity. Twisted Metal 2012 introduced some different game modes. Some of these modes are worth keeping for the sake of mixing up the core gameplay, other modes not so much. First of all, I want the core moment-to-moment gameplay to be traditional Twisted Metal free-for-all destruction. For example, straight-up races can go. Those are not needed nor wanted. If you want a racing game, keep it to the designated racing games. But something like the electric cage match is fun and interesting. You have to kill everybody, yes, but you also have to stay within a moving safe zone, otherwise you suffer a health loss after a while. The Juggernaut battle is also a good idea, having enemies constantly spawn until you destroy the vehicle spawning the enemies. As far as multiplayer, this could also make a fun isometric multiplayer game with one player controlling the Juggernaut trying to rack up points and the other 3 players trying to destroy the Juggernaut. And even though I want full-on races removed, that doesn't mean you can't have game modes that have elements of racing. What I mean is, you can have a game mode where the goal is to race to get to a specific goal, and the person who gets there first gets some sort of advantage, but after the first person to get it gets it, the game turns into a regular deathmatch. That could be fun because it changes up the strategy slightly. Do you want to pick a fast car with a low health and risk not having enough health in order to win, even with the advantage, or do you want to stick back and pick a slower but more powerful vehicle? There are plenty of different ways you can mix up the standard formula, so I guess the overall point is I would like there to be a few extra modes. These are the modes I've come up with, but I'm sure there are plenty of other ideas you can come up with without resorting to changing the formula. Hell, you could even have a custom mode creator where you could create a custom rule set for a unique game mode experience in either single or multiplayer. And you don't have to sacrifice the traditional gameplay either. These should be an aside, but the default mode should be the same game we've come to know and love, no exceptions. The traditional Twisted Metal gameplay has been perfected for a while. At this point, it's more about refinement, and I think you could really spruce up the traditional gameplay just by adding copious amounts of production value. And if anything, I think Twisted Metal deserves the absolute maximum amount of production value you can get. The game's all about the sound design, the visual design, how it feels to really lay into your opponents. I want to make ramming into your opponents more satisfying than ever. I want nailing your opponents with a series of missiles to be more satisfying than ever. And there are plenty of ways to do this, but the big thing you want to do is just start adding little details and never stop. Destruction is one of the most baseline things to stimulate the id, and you really want to play into this by making the destruction purely stimulating. The great thing about modern technology is we have the capabilities now to be able to make more detailed graphics and effects than ever, and in a game about spectacle like Twisted Metal, that is exactly what you want, or at least what I want. I want the gameplay to be super visceral and satisfying in ways that only modern technology can make it. And speaking of modern technology, this is something that we kinda got a sampling of in Twisted Metal 2012, but I really want them to go all out with it. In Twisted Metal 2012, some of the buildings were semi or fully destructible. If possible, I want as much of these environments to be as fully destructible as possible. Full destructibility is something that's rarely done in a lot of games because of how processor intensive it is, because instead of having buildings that are basically just giant cement boxes with windows painted on, you need to have each building be comprised of several hundred physics objects. However, if Twisted Metal 2012 could kinda do this, I see no reason why we couldn't take it to its logical conclusion and make most, if not all, of the environmental set dressing fully or almost fully destructible. Bringing large-scale destruction like this to Twisted Metal, I think could only make it better, because having levels that feel lively and reactive makes the gameplay feel so much more satisfying. Games in the past could come across as somewhat static, and as a result the gameplay felt somewhat rigid, but now we're able to have much more organic feeling environments. This may just be me, but something that I really look for in combat-oriented games, especially ones where spectacle is the selling point, is the feeling that my battle will have lasting effects on the environment around me. But in a lot of cases, things like explosions just leave black marks that eventually fade, and the enemies you kill often just despawn. What's even the point if everything is the exact same right after the fight as it was before? I want Twisted Metal to embrace that attitude. Destructible environments also gives you a lot of opportunities for organic excitement. Instead of just having a ramp, you could knock down a building and ramp off it. Or hell, you could time an explosion in order to have debris fall on your enemies in such a way to eliminate them. So not only does a destructible environment give you the spectacle, it also gives you more gameplay options. Less efficient gameplay options, but let's be honest, making a building collapse on someone may be inefficient, but it's really, really cool. In a game about destruction, there should be no shortage of ways to cause destruction. Just having the spectacle by itself, the spectacle of blowing the environment around you apart while attempting to blow the crap out of your enemies, is something that makes my mouth water just thinking about it, and I'm all but certain it could be done. And you could use this to work secrets and whatnot into your level design, having secret areas be hidden behind destructible scenery and whatnot. I would also like them to do whatever they can do to make the levels feel as lively as possible. NPCs to run over, ordinary non-enemy cars to crash into, the works. Hell, maybe you can even do what the first game did and have NPCs futilely attacking you. They would have every reason to do so if you're destroying the city. Yes, I'm fully aware of the fact that this makes me sound like a f***ing maniac. I guess if I were to pick my most wanted thing out of the entire game, this little section is definitely my most wanted series of features, but I know all of these things come down to one phrase: production value. As for the other aspects of gameplay, I think they could do with rearranging the weapons slightly. They've gone through a lot of different weapon archetypes over the years, and some of them can get pretty redundant. Something like the shotgun from Twisted Metal 2012 is a great new idea. Devastating at close range, useless at long range. But then you had things like the sniper rifle, which was just awkward to use. Or further back, there was something like the mortars in Twisted Metal 3, which was just slightly less reliable versions of the fire missile. A semi-homing, moderately damaging missile. I think my ideal weapon roster from what we've seen so far is, first of all, as far as the main go-to weapons, you want the major missile archetypes. The weak homer, the stronger semi-homer, and the powerful no-homer. From there, napalm is always a good choice, as is the remote explosives, but don't make it a fireable like in 2012. That made it kinda useless. I prefer it when it's used like a trap rather than a slightly inefficient fireable missile where you have to activate it manually. The oil cannon and ricochet are both good. Mega machine guns is a no-brainer. I'd like to see them bring back the oil spill. That was a fun little nugget from the first game that was lost to time. Then I think between the satellite missiles, stalker missiles, swarmer missiles, and zoomy missiles, you have too many weapons that are too similar, so I would probably cut a few of those. I would probably keep satellite and swarmer, but the stalker and zoomy can go. Now, between level-specific environmental attacks and the universal lightning attacks, I prefer environmental over lightning. I prefer a weapon that's unique for every level, even if it's more useful in some levels than others. There's no reason that a level's environmental attack couldn't also incorporate lightning in some cases, that way you get the best of both worlds. Are there any interesting ideas for weapons that haven't been used already? Probably. Like a giant magnet so you can throw your enemies around Cole McGrath style? I don't know, I'm just spitballing. Leave your idea for a new weapon they could use in the comment section below. But there is definitely one thing that I would like to see with the weapons. You know how games like Crash Team Racing will have it where if you pick up 10 Wumpa Fruit, your weapons will supercharge? I would like to see something like that. Pick up 5 or 10 of a thing and don't get hit and your weapons will supercharge. Like maybe you'll launch 3 ricochets instead of 1. This is pretty goofy, but Twisted Metal has always been slightly goofy, even at its most dark. I don't think this would be too overpowered either, because you would need to collect a certain amount of something and not get hit in the meantime, and with a free-for-all demolition derby this big, you're going to be attacked all the time, so it should be a slightly rare advantage. I also think it would be fun to do something like what the Burnout series does, and give you a slight advantage every time you kill an opponent, like you get unlimited turbo for 15 seconds or something. Once again, just spitballing. And in case people don't like new additions like this, you can always have the option to turn it off in the options menu. The more options, the better. As for the healing, I think I prefer the healing pads over healing items. There's a slight basting of adrenaline when you're running low on health and have to rush to the nearest healing pad that you don't get with healing items that are just laying around. Of course you still want to have the healing items, but just do it like how Black did it, where the healing items heal you just a bit and the healing pads heal you all the way but can only be used a few times per match. You don't want the healing pads to be too overpowered. As for the level themes, Twisted Metal has ran the whole gamut between levels that were played completely straight to complete and utter nonsense, and on the sliding scale of this wackiness, I prefer it to be a light touch. I guess you want to have levels to match the tone of the game that you're making. Something like Twisted Metal Black required a more grounded level theming, where Twisted Metal 4 was on 12 different types of LSD, but I prefer personally that the level theming remains kind of on the range of Twisted Metal 2, but that's just me. But do make sure to have a couple levels on top of buildings. Those ones are always awesome. However, there is one specific thing that I want out of the levels of a full-fledged Twisted Metal sequel. It's something that Twisted Metal 4 did that I like the idea of, but wasn't taken to its fullest potential. I think each level, or at least most of the levels, should have a unique gimmick or random event. You know how the Tokyo level in Twisted Metal 3 was covered in lava? What if you had something like that, where the level starts out normal, and then there's a random chance that the volcano will go off and cover the level in lava? It might give you an opportunity for more organic feeling levels in that random events can happen like this. You could even make it something as simple as something like the first level of Twisted Metal Black, where the rainstorm picks up and affects visibility. Of course I want them to give us the option to turn this off for when the novelty wears off, and it doesn't even need to be in every level, but I do think it would be a fun addition. And another thing about the levels, well, you know how they have a designated set of classic characters they always roll out for these games? I say, why don't they pull a Mario Kart and do the same for the levels? Grab a selection of fan favorite old levels and remake them in glorious HD. Primarily focus on new levels, but don't be shy about including the old ones as well. This would also be a good way to indulge in DLC. Have additional level remakes be available to buy. I'm frugal as hell, and even I'd buy that. I don't know what the community's favorite levels are, but if I were to pick my favorites, I'd go with the final level from Twisted Metal 1, Paris, Amazonia, and Hong Kong from Twisted Metal 2, Tokyo from Twisted Metal 3, the final level from Twisted Metal 4, Drive-In Movie, Prison Passage, and Abandoned Skyscrapers from Black, Transylvania from Head On, Black Rock Stadium from 2012. That's my personal selection, but I'm sure everyone has their own personal selection of favorite levels. Either way, bringing back some of the old while giving us some new will make me a very happy chap. As for the driving physics, I'd say keep it as arcadey and responsive as possible. There might be some temptation to go into a more realistic direction, but the acid test we had for that was the 2016 Carmageddon game. They tried to go for overly realistic physics, and everyone hated it. In a game like this, the last thing you want is for the controls to be fighting you. So don't. If it's not a simulation, it doesn't need to be realistic. Alright, so that more or less covers my wish list as far as gameplay is concerned, but of course there are other appeals to Twisted Metal for me. One of my first videos was about how much the story of Twisted Metal Black intrigued me, because while it was mostly contained to character intros, mid-game cutscenes, and outros, there was an undercurrent of intrigue with the whole setting possibly being a giant hallucination within the mind of Needles Kane, with Needles' other personality, Marcus Kane, fighting a losing battle for mental supremacy. It was a cool twist, you know, and one of those things you can analyze for days. And even while stories for Twisted Metal are usually only contained within small chunks, I'd say that the characters' personalities and the general narrative is something that's important to the series. The genre that I most compare Twisted Metal to is the one-on-one fighting genre, because especially for a time, one-on-one fighters would have a unique story for every character, which you could see by playing through their tower mode. It's usually just an intro and an outro, but it was a staple of the genre. However, eventually, one-on-one fighters evolved to having more deliberately constructed narratives that involved all, if not most of the characters. And the Twisted Metal story formula has always been similar to a tower mode in a fighting game. But here's the thing, I know a lot of people didn't like Twisted Metal 2012 for only allowing you to play as 3 different characters in the story mode, where classic Twisted Metal allowed you to play as any number of colorful characters. I didn't mind that so much because from a gameplay point of view, the different characters you can play as in previous games had a fundamental effect on gameplay, but as far as the story, all it affected was the ending cutscene. And believe it or not, I actually kinda liked Twisted Metal 2012 for the fact that it had one, or rather 3, in-depth structured stories, even if they weren't great stories. But that also did come at the expense of the traditional structure of Twisted Metal, so I say screw it, why can't we do both? Let's take a page out of something like the modern Mortal Kombat playbook. Recent Mortal Kombat games have a story mode as well as a traditional tower mode where you can play as a specific character and get their specific ending. I would like an in-depth, deliberately structured story mode based around the characters within the Twisted Metal series like 2012, but hopefully better, and then I would like to have a classic mode, which would just be the traditional Twisted Metal game mode, where you pick from any number of colorful characters, each with their own personality and character profile, and then you fight your way through 8 or so levels with a few bosses sprinkled in, finishing off with that character's specific ending. I'm not sure if Sony sees Twisted Metal as a series worthy of full-fledged AAA treatment, but I don't see why it couldn't be just that. Now, what kind of story would I like to see from a Twisted Metal story mode? I have no idea, but I would like to see the story be based around a chapter system similar to Mortal Kombat, so you can get a few levels to highlight specific characters. You could have it where each chapter is an in-depth look at a specific character similar to 2012, where they get their wish in the end, or you could have a large overarching story that affects multiple characters, carries over between chapters, and builds to a climax similar to the aforementioned recent Mortal Kombat games. And I prefer the latter, otherwise you risk redundancies with the classic mode telling the same story just with less depth. So I don't know, maybe you could build a story around Calypso using his own hired guns to take out certain competitors he sees as too powerful enough to take him down. I think a compelling story could be very easily written about Calypso rigging the game for his own benefit. The reason I bring up the possibility of Calypso's hired guns is because I would like to see some new characters. Now here's the thing, I'm not saying that they should do what Twisted Metal 4 did and scrap most of the iconic characters except for the boss fights, but I do think that Twisted Metal has been bogged down in having a very specific character roster for a bit too long. Even when they have new characters, they still tend to use the same cars, so I would still want to have the big heavy hitters, Sweet Tooth, Roadkill, Axel, Darkseid, Mr. Grimm, Warthog, Outlaw, and what have you. But maybe once you have that, you can have a team of 7 or so new characters ran by Calypso. Hell, this might piss off some of the fans, but maybe you could even have Minion be Calypso's right-hand man, taking care of business on the ground level and leading Calypso's squad so as to not break the rules of his own tournament by getting involved himself. Presumably this would be another reboot, so I would like to see them take liberties with the established tropes like that. And thinking about it, I would like to see them really build off the Marcus Kane-Needles Kane connection. Hear me out. What if Calypso starts targeting Marcus Kane even though he's not much of a threat himself, but his alter ego, Sweet Tooth, is what Calypso fears because he's become too powerful. And so Calypso wants to take out Marcus Kane before he can unleash the beast, so to speak. Marcus, meanwhile, has no idea why he's being targeted because he presumably doesn't know about Needles, but slowly over time realizes who he really is and realizes the power of his alter ego. And that could kind of build into the final chapter. Have the final chapter be Sweet Tooth's final confrontation with Calypso and his team. In the same way that Mortal Kombat 11 ended with, spoilers, Fire God Liu Kang against Kronika and her minions. Only, hopefully, Twisted Metal will be written like 18 times better than Mortal Kombat 11. And hell, this could even open up possibilities for a direct sequel. Maybe this game ends with Sweet Tooth taking out Calypso, and then he himself takes control of the tournament like Twisted Metal 4. I should also mention I would want the classic game mode to be pure 100% deathmatch and nothing else. However, I want the story to feature variations on the standard gameplay like what Twisted Metal 2012 did. That way you don't hinder the people just looking for a classic Twisted Metal experience. So, those are the big things. Any other things I'd want? Well, you know how Twisted Metal 4 featured Rob Zombie as a playable character? I would like to see that level of absurd guest characters again. And with that, I know where they can start. I know people are probably gonna laugh at this, but I think they should add Kratos as a playable character. He has a pedigree of being a guest character in various series, and it's established that he was a former contestant. I think that would be great. Absurd, but great. It'd be even better if they decide to go for a tone more in line with Twisted Metal Black. And hey, if they decide to go with a tone more in line with the original run of games, another guest character they could go with is Spider-Man. That's assuming Sony has full control over the Spider-Man character in video game form. And considering that God of War PS4 and Spider-Man PS4 are two of the best-selling games of the entire generation, you could probably tap into their popularity to get more people on board. I'm not too bothered with which specific tone they go with. They could go with goofy or dark and I'd be happy either way. The only direction I'd question is if they decided to go with a small brawl style tone, because as good as that game was, controversial opinion, the childish tone is definitely the most off-putting part of the game. Now that's pretty much my piece, but I figured because I'm still a relative newcomer that I probably don't have as much to say as the veterans, and if I do, chances are a lot of it's going to contradict with what they say, so I decided to reach out to the community and ask them what they would want in a new game, and this was their response. Electronic Regret 484 writes, no microtransactions or any sort of free-to-play systems, a decent enjoyable campaign mode with endings that are actually fun or interesting to watch, and at least somewhat balanced online mode, quality over quantity, throwbacks or references to older games, and bonus, Melvin. Who's Melvin? Oh, him. Yeah, okay. Ricky Robbie writes, I want the full roster of the classic characters, no messing with the formula like 2012 did, a balance between dark and cartoony, stay away from the shitty Fortnite school of design, and don't make the game so fast. Dream Awake writes, I want to play Twisted Metal 2-4 in 60 FPS with really good graphics running on PS5 with a nice SSD for 0 load times. What about the first game? I want the characters Twister, Axel, Minion, Roadkill, Grasshopper, Thumper, Sweet Tooth, the super big boss version of Sweet Tooth, any other characters I can't remember, lol. I want the iconic storytelling ending for every time you beat the single player mode as a game. I want destructible and iconic level design, including shortcuts and secrets. I want better controls somehow to make the controls easier and less frustrating to play. Smoother, easier, friendlier, I'm not sure. I want vehicles to show damage over time. A good soundtrack. Heh. Ed Mario writes, if alternate skins for vehicles are going to be a thing, then Darkseid needs to get one that's the semi from Maximum Overdrive. I don't know what that is. Yeah, okay. And finally, Slow Crates writes, tight, responsive arcade-like controls, graphic novel style, ominous, creepy, funny themes, dynamic and creative characters / cars and maps / levels, robust campaign / stories, ease of use, quick and easy menu screen, game modes, options, the fewer clicks / time between action and objective, the better. Large community support, online gameplay, variety of game modes, customization, map making support. So yeah, some good suggestions. Some I agree with, some I don't, but hey, we're all human. Between all this, I'd say we have a good list of requests going, so here's my list. And that's that. Whatever's next for Twisted Metal, assuming it's not some crappy mobile game. Oh dear. I look forward to it, because Twisted Metal's probably the series that's most intrigued and enthralled me over these past several months. Hopefully they listen to the fans, because if they do plan on continuing the series after its long dormancy, I'd say a good first step in ensuring the longevity of the series is listening to the fans. If you like this video, leave a comment and subscribe. As you know, I'm the king of snark style on Tactical Bacon Productions. Now, I can't think of any way to sign off on this matter, so I suppose I could always go for the classic sudden ending.